Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
Good morning, I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Here are the stories we're following today.
Karen, the sell-off in Nvidia shares continues this morning. That stock is down 1.33% in early trading, adding to a 9.5% drop yesterday that wiped $279 billion off Nvidia's value. That was a record one-day loss for a U.S. stock. The latest catalyst for the sell-off is a Bloomberg News exclusive. Sources say the Justice Department has sent subpoenas to Nvidia and other companies as it seeks evidence the chipmaker violated competition laws. Officials are concerned Nvidia is making it harder to switch to other suppliers and penalizes buyers that don't exclusively use its AI chips. Bloomberg technology reporter Ian King broke the story.
We've reported a while ago that there was questionnaires going out, that they were just sort of asking customers, asking competitors, what was going on in the market. The fact that this has gone to the subpoena stage, the legally enforceable request for information, is usually a sign of an escalation.
In response to questions about the probe, Bloomberg's Ian King reports Nvidia says its market dominance stems from the quality of its products, which deliver faster performance.
Well, Nathan, it is risk-off this morning around the world. Japan's Nikkei fell 4.2%, and stocks in Europe are down more than 1%. This follows yesterday's Wall Street sell-off, which saw the S&P 500 drop more than 2%, while the Nasdaq plunged almost 3.3%. The start of a historically tough month for markets came as a closely watched U.S. manufacturing gauge again missed forecasts. Bloomberg's Mark Cranfield says investors are concerned the Fed is not doing enough.
In some people's minds, the Fed is already behind the curve, and people may have come to the conclusion that even cutting rates by 25 basis points later this month is just not going to be enough. When they look at some of the data which has come through recently and they look ahead to the employment report at the end of this week, they're probably saying, well, we really need 50 basis points to kickstart this thing. We're not going to get it, and so it's time to take some risk off the table. There's just too much uncertainty ahead. And on top of that, you see the most important stock in the world has a very, very bad start, and that will just trigger a lot of defensive moves by people across the board.
And Bloomberg's Mark Cranfield notes the S&P 500 saw its worst start to September since 2015. For the Nasdaq 100, it was the worst since 2002.
And Karen, another chipmaker besides Nvidia is in the spotlight this morning. The Biden-Harris administration's big bet on Intel to lead a U.S. chip-making renaissance is in grave trouble. Bloomberg's John Tucker joins us with more. John, what's the issue?
Intel's mounting financial struggles to start with, Nathan. The company is supposed to receive $8.5 billion in grants and $11 billion in loans from the 2022 CHIPS and Science Act, but only if the chipmaker meets key milestones. And Intel is mired in a sales slump worse than anticipated. It's also hemorrhaging cash. We reported last week they're considering drastic actions, including possibly splitting off its manufacturing division or cutting back if global factory plans. What's more, the company has resisted sharing certain information requested by U.S. officials who are seeking to vet the viability of Intel's manufacturing roadmap. It's a pretty troubling development for a company that's supposed to help boost the U.S. semiconductor workforce. John Tucker, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, John, thank you. Well, the recent sell-off in oil continues. Checking crude right now. NYMEX crude oil is down 0.6%. It's at $69.92 a barrel, while Brent is at $73.42. The drop follows yesterday's more than 4% loss. The Libyan central banker, at the heart of a power struggle between two rival governments, said a deal appears imminent to resolve the dispute and resume oil output. Bloomberg Middle East energy correspondent Anthony DiPaola says Libya's supply is still uncertain.
According to reports that we've seen, the crude available and the crude in storage is really diminishing there. So it is kind of cycling up and down, but that's a real question in Libya. They were talking about 1 million barrels or so of production that, according to some of our reporting, was down by at least half.
And Bloomberg's Anthony DiPaola says oil has now wiped out all of this year's gains.
Turning to the presidential race now, Karen, Goldman Sachs economists are gaming out the impact of a potential Trump or Harris presidency. The bank's researchers are warning if Trump returns to the White House, higher tariffs and tighter immigration policy could lead to a hit to U.S. GDP. Should Kamala Harris win and Democrats take control of both chambers of Congress, Goldman says new spending and expanded middle-income tax credits would slightly more than offset lower investment due to higher corporate tax rates.
Well, Nathan, Kamala Harris plans to unveil another tax credit as part of her economic policy rollout. A Harris campaign official says the vice president will call for raising the small business tax deduction for startup costs from $5,000 to $50,000. Harris and former President Trump are competing on tax policy with a slate of tax cuts due to expire next year. The vice president will unveil her latest proposals in a speech in New Hampshire later today.
In the meantime, Karen, former President Trump has taken a legal setback. A federal judge in Manhattan has turned down his bid to transfer his New York hush money case to federal court. The move could have delayed his sentencing on 34 felony counts, which right now is set for September 18th. Trump has argued the Supreme Court's ruling on presidential immunity means the case should be dismissed, even though it relates to actions he took before he was president. The trial judge, Juan Merchan, says he will consider the immunity argument and decide on the motion to overturn Trump's conviction by September 16th.
Now, Nathan, let's get to the latest in the Middle East. The Justice Department has unsealed terrorism and conspiracy charges against 6 senior Hamas leaders, including Yahya Sinwar and Ismail Haniyeh, who was killed in Tehran in July. Attorney General Merrick Garland says Hamas has run a decades-long campaign to murder Americans and endanger national security.
The charges unsealed today are just one part of our effort to target every aspect of Hamas's operations. These actions will not be our last.
And Attorney General Merrick Garland waited for months to unseal these charges, as we hear from Bloomberg's Paul Wallace.
They were filed in February but only unsealed yesterday. It's unclear why the Justice Department has done that. But it's possible that last weekend's discovery of the 6 Israeli hostages who were killed, including an Israeli American, might have had something to do with that.
And Bloomberg's Paul Wallace reports that Justice Department is investigating the death of that American hostage, Hersh Goldberg Poland, as an act of terrorism. And it's time now for a look at some of the other stories making news in New York and around the world. And for that, we're joined by Bloomberg's Michael Barr. Michael, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. Linda Sun, a former aide to New York Governors Kathy Hochul and Andrew Cuomo, has been arrested. Sun and her husband, Chris Hu, have been charged with spying for the Chinese government. They're accused of allegedly receiving millions of dollars in kickbacks from Beijing. Sun and her husband both pleaded not guilty to the criminal charges, and they're free on bond. An official says Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba has resigned. The foreign minister's resignation today came as at least 7 people were killed, 35 injured in an overnight strike in Lviv. The mayor says a child and a medical worker were among the dead and others are in critical condition. Yesterday, at least 51 people were killed and at least 200 hurt in a deadly airstrike in eastern Ukraine. The strike hitting a hospital and college in the city of Poltava, and Ukrainian forces say it was the work of Russian ballistic missiles. State Department spokesman Matthew Miller said that the U.S. military is constantly assessing Ukraine's need.
We have adapted our policy over time based on changes in the battlefield. We continue to remain flexible and look at changes in the battlefield and adapt and adjust our policy when necessary, something the Secretary has spoken to, and that's what we'll continue to do.
Ukrainian President Zelensky has been urging the U.S. to lift its restrictions on using military aid inside Russia, but the U.S. says it's being cautious since it could lead to retaliation from Moscow. The 17-year-old who allegedly shot NFL player Ricky Pearsall over the weekend in San Francisco will be charged with attempted murder. He'll be arraigned in juvenile court this afternoon at the Youth Center in San Francisco. District Attorney Brooke Jenkins said whether he'll be tried as an adult is not her decision.
At this time, the charges will be filed in the juvenile court. No longer under California law can a district attorney choose to file those charges against a minor in adult court.
DA Brooke Jenkins says the teen also faces firearms charges. And as for Pearsall, the rookie was back at the Niners training facility working out. There's dangerous heat in the western U.S. this week from Spokane and Portland down to Las Vegas and Palm Springs. It has been potentially record-breaking heat. In Vegas, it will be around 107 degrees for the next 3 days. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it. With Bloomberg News Now, I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg, Karen.
All right, Michael Barr, thank you. Time Time now for the Bloomberg Sports Update with Dan Schwartzman. Dan, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. Yankees drop out of first place in the AL East in walk-off fashion.
The bases are loaded for Wyatt Langford with the Rangers trailing 4-3. The set by Holmes and the payoff pitch swung on and a deep drive to left. That ball is way, way back. That ball is history. A walk-off slam for Wyatt Langford.
That's courtesy of the Rangers TV network. Rookie Wyatt Langford hitting the game winner off closer Clay Holmes, who has now blown a major league leading 11 saves. With the loss, Yankees dropping a half game behind the Orioles in the AL East after Baltimore knocks off the White Sox 9-0. Mets, meanwhile, stay hot. They win their 6th in a row, 7-2 over the Red Sox. Mets stay a half game back of the Braves to the final wild card slot in the NL as Atlanta shuts out Colorado 3-0. Elsewhere, Nationals beat the Marlins 6-2. Giants lose to the Diamondbacks 8-7. A's slip past the Mariners 3-2. There will be an All-American semifinal at the U.S. Open. Taylor Fritz knocking off Alexander Zverev in 4 sets, while Francis Tiafoe beats Grigor Dimitrov as the Bulgarian retires due to injury in the 5th set, down 2-1. The Americans will play each other on Friday. In the women's draw, American Emma Navarro moves on to the semis, a straight sets win over Paula Badosa. In the other quarterfinal match, Arina Sabalenka dominates Zheng Qinwen, losing just 3 games total. Today, top seed Jannik Sinner battles Daniil Medvedev. Jack Draper faces Alex de Minaur, while top seed Iga Swiatek plays American Jessica Pegula, and Beatrice Haddad-Maia takes on Karolina Muchova. That's your Bloomberg Sports Update. I'm Dan Schwartzman, Karen and Nathan.
Coast to coast on Bloomberg Radio, nationwide on Sirius XM, and around the world on Bloomberg.com and the Bloomberg Business app. This is Bloomberg Daybreak.
Good morning, I'm Nathan Hager. With oil sinking to its lowest level of the year, investors are trying to gauge how far the sell-off could extend. Jeff Curry, Chief Strategy Officer of Energy Pathways at the Carlyle Group, joined Bloomberg Television for a discussion on the path forward for energy and commodities. He talked about being short oil and how $70 WTI could impact global growth. Let's listen in.
It'll definitely stimulate it relative to 85, 90, but I think, yes, you're right. It did sell off based upon concerns around China. But the data disappointment was a PMI that was expected to be 49.5 and came out at 49.1. Does that justify the oil market being at a record short? Absolutely not. No, I'm not going to argue Chinese demand growth is robust in any shape or form. And yes, they have structural problems on the longer term outlook. But by all means, it's not a collapse that would justify the market being as short today as it was in the global financial crisis of 08. So you got to ask what's going on here. It's something far deeper than a slowdown in China, because when you look at this market fundamentally, inventories are low. The forward curve today, even after the sell-off, is backwardated, and a very high level of backwardation, which is consistent with a very tight, fundamentally strong market. And then the third issue is concerns around OPEC bringing on supply. They're bringing on a small amount that is being completely compensated for by decreases out of Kazakhstan as well as Iraq. And given the credibility of OPEC recently, it's going to be important that that credibility is maintained. So I think these fears need to be put in the context of what the physical market looks like, which is relatively robust. Oil is more volatile than most of the other sectors, so it has an extra cost to holding it. We estimate that to hold oil with a risk-free return of 5.25%, which is where the money markets are paying you right now, you need a return in excess of 14.25%, call it 15%. A 15% price move at a $75 price level means somewhere around, $10 or $11 a barrel. And then, so your expectations have to be for a big upward move before you're going to own it. Now with the sell-off down to 73 on a Brent basis, the probability of seeing that upside is now much more likely. You're probably going to see investors pull money out of the money markets and put it back into oil. But when I talk about the borrowing costs in being short oil, essentially by drawing down your inventories to very low levels, you're leaving yourself very exposed to being short if something were to happen, like a demand surprise to the upside or some type of supply shock. Then the physical guys would have to come in, cover that short, which means increase the demand for the physical barrels. And then you look at the paper inventories, call it working capital of physical oil, working capital of financial oil. They're also short the financial oil. And so when we look at the market today, you have, record shorts against really low inventories. That historically doesn't happen. The only explanation for that is people are taking money out of this market, taking working capital out of this market and putting it into higher returning endeavors. Now with the pullback, you're likely to see some of that money come back in. You'll race back up.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Today, your morning brief on the stories making news from Wall Street to Washington and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed at 6 a.m. Eastern each morning on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning starting at 5 a.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg 1130 in New York, Bloomberg 99.1 in Washington, Bloomberg 106.1 in Boston, and Bloomberg 960 in San Francisco.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Plus, listen coast to coast on the Bloomberg Business app, SiriusXM, the iHeartRadio app, and on Bloomberg.com. I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day right here on Bloomberg Daybreak.